Hey, what's up guys? Note Investor here doing a weekly recap, and what a week it was in the crypto space. So much action, bearish across the space. It was the crypto Armageddon in many ways. It was the perfect storm. We saw a confluence of many things just all coming together. As you guys know, big red week, big drop on Wednesday. There was news. We started the week with some Tether FUD and then the Bitcoin Cash splits, and that drama just continues. So a couple of things I'm going to make note of here, but we'll do a quick weekly recap, look at the total cryptocurrency market, as well as some charts. We'll take a deep dive into Bitcoin, some key price levels to be watching here over the next couple of days, and a few standouts that are just bucking the trend and continue to hold up relatively well considering the carnage that we've seen here over the last several days. So looking at the coin market cap here, you can see all cryptocurrencies for the week. Ugly red across the board. Bitcoin down 13% over the last 7 days. Ripple holding up well, edging Ethereum out of that number 2 spot in terms of total market cap at 19 billion versus 17. Ethereum down a whopping 18%. Bitcoin Cash had a pretty rough week, and it's still kind of going on with the two chain splits. We'll get into that here shortly. Stellar holding up relatively well, just like Ripple, relatively speaking, up over the last couple of days here a little bit. EOS double digits. Litecoin down 20%, and you can just see it was just right across the board. The small mid-cap space did not fare any better. There was really no place to hide, including the stable coins, which were not very stable this week. There was just a lot of movement there, and so rough week, as you guys know. Looking at the total coin market cap, BTC dominance just very much unchanged over the last 7 days. We started off the week right around that 52% mark, still there basically. Looking at the total cryptocurrency market cap valuation, hitting a new yearly low, down to the $180 billion mark here, after sitting in this very tight range since September. Really, October was a very flat month, and here heading into November, we were looking for that inevitable breakout going into year end. We were in this big holding pattern, and unfortunately it broke lower, but odds favored that the path of least resistance was the downside. Bitcoin was in this big descending triangle base, as we saw, broke support and had a very big drop. And so that was the week in summary. Obviously a lot of detail, a lot of underlying reasons why we saw so much movement, but the carnage was rough for a lot of the traders and investors caught off guard. The break was fast and furious. The volume was high across the board, and the next question is, what happens now, right? We've suffered some big damage technically to the charts. There's still some drama out there with some of the news items that drove the activity this week. So let's go take a look at some of that, and we'll go into the details here. So looking at the chart here, this is the daily chart of BTC on Coinbase, and you can see it's really been unchanged for the last couple of days. On Thursday, we had a sell-off that undercut the prior day's low, and then the bulls managed to rally it pretty good, but couldn't get it above that mark to turn it into a big green bar. Nonetheless, it did finish as a big reversal hammer bar on the candle there. So big wick. The last 2 days have been within that range, just sitting relatively flat. That's the one positive for the bulls, is that was that big reversal. We saw it on pretty good volume, but other than that, have not seen any follow through. You can see here on the 4-hour chart, just sitting very tight, continuing to narrow out here, still below this 10 EMA. Now the moving average is sitting right above price, and so as I mentioned in my last update, this is really the zone to be watching. Bitcoin has to get above that, and that's really going to be the next resistance level on any bounce. But if you go back to the daily chart, we could still see a bounce up into this moving average range on the daily, and that would still simply be just a bounce. The technical damage done was significant. This base was a long established support zone, and as we know, once that support gives out, it becomes a resistance, and so that's going to really be the big thing to watch here in the coming days and weeks, is how prices react, if they can even bounce that high, but how they react on any bounces into that resistance zone. But for now, we're still very much in the oversold conditions, and there's really two ways that this is resolved, either by time or by price, meaning Prices just got to sit tight here and go flat for a little bit, let these moving averages catch up, or they got to bounce into resistance and work some of that off. Unfortunately, the momentum is still very much in favor of the bears, in favor of the sellers, barring any near-term bounces, which I still expect to see some more upside here, to be honest. A little bit of bounce action, but the question is always, how high does it bounce? Where does the selling start showing up again? And at that point, we'd have to do a retest and look for either a new low on the daily chart or a higher low, some sort of retest on the downside, some sort of confirmation, and then go from there. So it's really going to be more of a longer term thing at this point. If you go to the weekly chart, big break on that weekly chart out of that big descending triangle pattern that we have been in for many, many months. And the last couple of months, as you know, were just very tight. But as I was saying, leaning bullish, or excuse me, leaning bearish, just because odds favored that this pattern was going to break to the downside. And honestly, it was a confluence of so many things this week. It was a little bit of the perfect storm. We were sitting very tight. Prices were vulnerable. It was kind of one of those next move win scenario. It could have broken to the upside just as easily if there was some sort of positive news, some sort of short covering rally. But we saw that big break to the downside, broke support, and once that support broke, you just saw the stop losses being triggered, the selling compounded, and the move was very fast and on very high volume to the downside. And people are asking, well, what was the reason? There was a lot of reasons. I think one of them was technically the chart was just setting up for a big breakout. We've been watching this pattern play out for many months. The other reason was the Bitcoin Cash drama, and there was reports that, hey, we're just going to fight this war and it's going to cost us Bitcoin and we're going to dump BTC, whatever it takes. So there's that aspect to it. There was also the Tether FUD that came in this week, and I mentioned this a few days prior before this really started to roll over, but look at how dramatic that drop was, and the parity was lost to the dollar here on Tether. And so there was just a lot of variation, a lot of volatility across the board, just so many reasons. CBOE expiry, I mean, there was a number of reasons, and really the best way to sum it up was this was the perfect storm. I mean, this was just setting up. Prices were tight and it just needed a catalyst, and I believe we had several catalysts. I mean, the only other thing that we could have had besides what we saw this week was some really bad news coming out of, government regulation or something. We still saw some of that, not as much, but, there was already some SEC, ICO drama and finding exchanges. So there was already some of that in the air, but the big reasons were just these technical levels were hit in conjunction with the Tether FUD and the Bitcoin Cash drama. But nonetheless, big red week, a lot of down action across the board. But going back to the stablecoin discussion here, we saw a lot of movement here as Tether was losing confidence. There was some issues around Bitfinex, and we saw this really move lower, and many of the competitors had inverse movements to the upside. So they were up very big. We saw PAX, we saw True USD, and now you're seeing a lot of discussion around this USD coin, which is a circle coin backed by Goldman, backed by Coinbase, backed by a lot of the major players. That's really starting to come to a head here. You're seeing more and more exchanges listing it. And there's a pretty interesting article here on CoinDesk talking about the various stables. I also sent out a tweet talking about some of the stable coins out there a couple of days ago. Check that out. It was a Bloomberg article that was pretty interesting. But you can see here, Tether by far is still the king in terms of trading volume as far as the various stable coins go. The next biggest one was, maybe 1.5% of total trading volume, even though the volumes have really spiked here over the last couple of weeks as some of the confidence is coming out of Tether. It still leads by far in terms of the stablecoin market. So there's a lot of competition coming. It's a big market, and there's a lot of reasons why people want to be the stablecoin of choice. Why why one particular project or stablecoin would want to dominate that market. There's a lot of incentive to, but you can see Tether still dominates by far. But we're starting to see more and more of these other names rise to the top of the list here in terms of viable alternatives, and you're going to see this continue to be a topic of discussion here over the next coming months. So unfortunately, I don't think it's going away. I think we're going to still see some drama. What we don't want to see is another one of these big spikes like we saw in October, where the market just really loses confidence when you see Tether have such a dramatic fall. It's bounced back quite a bit here. Still not back at parity, but at 98 cents on the dollar here on this USD Tether versus dollar on the Kraken exchange here. So switching over to the Bitcoin Cash drama, you can see here on Coinbase, this is right before the split happened, or right as the block splits happened, the chain split happened. And you can see at that point, Bitcoin Cash had already fully retraced that entire move prior to the fork, right? The big front running pump we saw, fully retraced that. It didn't help that the market was in free fall mode, and that added to the selling pressure. And just as the fork happened, many of the exchanges stopped trading, and we have since seen competing chains with two different coins trying to take that dominance. Binance started trading both of those coins, Bitcoin Cash ABC here on the left and Bitcoin Cash SV here on the right. And these are the 1 hour charts since trading started on the USD Tether pair for both of these coins. And you can see it's been very volatile. Immediately after trading began, Bitcoin Cash SV was trading at $80 and saw a massive pump going into that initial trading, up over 100%. Then a big pullback, down 20-some%, then back up again another 30%. So it just has been very volatile here. Both names are starting to tighten up here a little bit. Bitcoin Cash ABC, as far as blocks and hash power goes, leads a little bit, not by a lot. There's a site called Cash Coin Dance, which you can get a lot of this information on here if you're interested in tracking this as it progresses. But you can see here Bitcoin Cash ABC is currently 51.2% ahead on proof of work, 14 blocks ahead there, but relatively close. Not a clear winner just yet. There was some controversy here. Bittrex listed Bitcoin Cash ABC as Bitcoin Cash now, with Bitcoin Cash SV as BSV. So there was jumping the gun, if you will, from this. And so interesting to see them kind of deciding to go one way right now with as far as the symbols go, but still undecided all around. So it's going to be interesting to see how these two play out. The expectation is once there is a clear winner, or if it looks like there's going to be one clear way, you can expect the value from one coin or the other to move over. Maybe not 100%, but you'll see a large majority of the value start to switch over if it looks like one's going to pull ahead, and most of the network will start supporting one versus the other. But right now, pretty split. The drama continues, and it's just not good for the space all around. I mean, just however you look at it, and I understand each camp has their reasons why and the disagreements, but just to see such a large cap market coin, and then of course both camps claiming that they are the real Bitcoin, and to just see this drama and to see the war and the hash war and the backbiting and just the name calling publicly, just very off-putting for the whole space in general, and just not reflect well in the total crypto community as a whole. But this will resolve itself one way or the other. So we'll just have to keep an eye on how this progresses over the next couple of days. And if you want more information, I'll link to that website here in the video notes. So let's take a look at some of the other charts here. So we saw Bitcoin, we looked at the 4 hour charts, and really the thing to make note here is just the moving averages continue to head down. Prices are starting to find resistance right at that 10 EMA. So until we break back above that, the momentum very much in favor of the sellers. And so we're just kind of going sideways here. Prices are really starting to narrow out. It's going to be interesting to see which way this breaks out. Purely technically speaking, this has a downward bias just because this is a little bit of a bear pennant. It had that big drop on volume, and then prices are just kind of going sideways, letting moving averages catch up, letting the RSI and other indicators cool off a little bit. And so technically this does have a bearish bias, but I am making note of the fact that the daily chart is still very much oversold, and we saw that big reversal hammer a couple days ago. And so until we break out one way or the other, I'm just going to take a neutral stance on this one, but it is leaning to the downside. Let's take a look at a few other names that have been holding out much better. First one is Ripple. As we saw, Ripple has edged out Ethereum from that number 2 spot, and we're seeing this one have a little bit of upward momentum here in the last couple of days versus BTC held up better than most, and you can see here already breaking to higher highs and just continues to hold up and just move upward versus Bitcoin. So this was one of the few names that has bounced back very quickly and continues to look strong all around. You can see the daily chart. Moving averages were never going flat or moving lower. Prices did breach temporarily, but it recovered very quickly and has since just been marching higher. And right now it's approaching a little bit of a breakout point on that daily chart. If you look at the last closing highs that we saw on Ripple, prices are approaching that zone right now. So it's going to be interesting to see if we get a little bit of a breakout. But nonetheless, one of the stronger names here over the last few days. Stellar Lumens, another one that versus BTC has been marching higher. We know that this is a Coinbase candidate, so that's a little bit of that there, but still a very strong name all around versus Bitcoin. But looking at it from the dollar pair, it's not quite as strong. That drop was pretty swift, pretty big. We saw some big wicks here near the lows, so it did recover quite a bit, but you can see these moving averages on the daily chart are starting to head down, and prices have been living below those moving averages over the last couple of days and below some key resistance levels. So from that perspective, certainly not as strong. Now, if Bitcoin can bounce a little bit here, this will help change this picture. But versus BTC, it is holding up much better. Looking at Ethereum versus Bitcoin, has fully retraced that breakout that we saw a couple weeks back. You can see once it broke out of this little pattern here, had that nice rally versus Bitcoin, and then just really started to underperform during this market selling that we saw, and still heading lower. If we zoom in a little bit and go to that 4-hour chart over the last couple of days, has really just been leaning lower and just drifting down here. Had a bounce again, like many names, just because that reaction was so fast, and the bounce was pretty good, but look where it bounced. Right into that moving average pair on that 4-hour chart, right into some resistance here, and since just kind of pulling back here, so starting to underperform BTC again. Quickly going through some of the other big cap names, you can see Cardano just drifting lower, still living below these moving averages. On the 4-hour chart, it is trying to form a little bit of a base here, a little bit of support, so keep an eye on that. But until they start to turn the corner and break some resistance near term, just got to remain cautious and defensive. EOS, a little bit stronger, but same general pattern here on many of these names. Here's IOTA. Again, you can see that same general pattern. Holding the lows on most of these so far, so this is really going to be the key zone to be watching over the next few days. Here's Litecoin. Tron trying to bounce back here a little bit. If we look at Tron BTC, it's trying to make this symmetrical pattern here, right? Still below moving averages, just the same as many of these others, but this one is starting to show a little bit of momentum to the upside. So watching this one here for some more upside action near term. And Monero versus dollar, again, just the same general pattern. So you can see across the board, they're just all really moving in sync from the USD pair, kind of following Bitcoin's lead, and in fact underperforming a little bit more than BTC. You can see Bitcoin has bounced a little bit and kind of going sideways. Many of these are still just drifting lower. So that's really going to be the key on a lot of these charts that look this way, is a break of that downtrend that they've been in for the last couple of days. It's going to be that first signal of, okay, here comes the bounce. How high is the bounce? Do we start making higher lows and going from there? Or is it just a bounce into resistance and then a new low? So that's what I'm going to be looking at for most of these pairs that are looking this way, that big downtrend, a break of that downtrend, and then start paying attention to how it starts to look on the daily chart and how high that resistance level is and how close the bounce can get to there. So in the big cap space, other than Ripple and Stellar, not a whole lot of other names showing much relative strength, kind of all just sitting tight as BTC consolidates here. In the small cap space, very much the same, not a whole lot of movement to the upside in a big way just yet. So for now, it's just being patient, waiting for this to play out, see what the next direction is. Don't overtrade in this environment. Don't overtrade this volatility. It's going to be very choppy. It's just best to wait until the next direction becomes clear, right? I'm thinking we'll see a bounce here, but until we can clear some near-term resistance, some near-term moving averages, odds favor that we'll see another leg down on that daily chart. And the support level to the downside remains the same. The near-term low that we saw on Wednesday during that big selling, or Thursday, which was around just below 5,200 on the Coinbase exchange, and then below that, around that 5K mark, which is really, in the big scheme of things, not that much further down, even though we don't want to see it go that far, but that's really the next big support zone. And right now, prices are just kind of in the middle ground in no man's land and waiting to see where the next move takes us. So a wild week, to say the least, my friends, and it wasn't much better in the stock market either. You look at some of the market that was under pressure there. We saw a pretty decent bounce on Friday, but a lot of volatility, a lot of downside action. So has been a turbulent week in many markets here. I know it can be frustrating. I know just from reading the sentiment, from talking with a lot of you guys, it's certainly putting a lot of crypto holders and crypto enthusiasts in a down mood, in a less enthusiastic mood about the space, and that is completely understandable, just kind of seeing what's transpired here over the last couple of days. And I guess the one positive is we're finally out of this very tight holding pattern that we had been in for months. Did not break in the way that everybody wanted it to break, but it finally broke out. That's behind us now. The next thing is, where do we go from here? Do we continue going lower? And ultimately, the bear market will come to an end. The question is, at what point, at what price? And this is just one more step in that direction and helping resolve some of that. So the sentiment is absolutely bearish. The pain is real, and the thresholds are getting hit. I know a lot of crypto enthusiasts are starting to throw in the towel, especially considering where we were, it's over the last year. And it's interesting because prices are not that much further from where they were this time last November. Last November, we saw a little bit of a sell-off as well, not as dramatic, but we had a sell-off that took us from 7K down to 5K BTC before rallying and going into that climactic move into year end. But it's on the other side of that downslope now, so this has been a rough grind lower over the last several months, and here we are breaking again, making a new low for the year. And so I can completely understand the sentiment and the reasons why people feel the way they do right now. So stay with it, my friends. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you watching as always. And I'll keep you guys updated. Until next time, take care, everyone.